Brakes screeched, tires skidded, and in an instant, Alexander's world collided with hers. As he stepped out of the car, his sharp gaze met hers, an undeniable fire in her amber eyes, a challenge in the set of her jaw. Most people cowered in his presence, not her. "What the hell, lady?" he snapped, brushing off the rain from his coat. Elena, drenched and breathless, shot back, "Maybe don't drive like you own the damn road." He did, in fact, own the road. But for the first time in his life, someone dared to say otherwise. And just like that, the war began. Neither knew that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than a simple collision. Something that would shake both of their worlds to the core. The tension between Alexander and Elena didn't dissolve with the rain. If anything, it lingered in the charged air between them, a silent war brewing beneath their clashing gazes. Alexander's patience, already razor-thin from the pressures of his family empire, snapped. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Elena rolled her eyes, shaking droplets of water from her hair. "Oh, let me guess. Some self-important billionaire who thinks the world revolves around him?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across Alexander's face. "Something like that." Before she could fire back, the hotel's doorman rushed forward, holding an umbrella over Alexander's head. "Sir, is everything all right?" Elena scoffed, shivering as the rain soaked through her thin sweater. "You know what? Forget it. I have better things to do than argue with a spoiled rich guy." She turned on her heel, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "You're blocking my entrance." Her temper flared, "and you nearly ran me over." Their standoff was interrupted by a sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulling up to the curb. The rear door swung open, revealing a woman draped in diamonds and an expensive gown. Catherine Grayson, Alexander's mother. She stepped out gracefully, her piercing gaze landing on Elena with immediate distaste. "Who is this person, Alexander?" Elena bristled at the way she said "person," as if she were some insignificant insect. Alexander's lips twitched. "Just someone who doesn't know when to move out of the way." Elena smirked. "And yet I'm still standing here." Catherine's eyes narrowed before she turned her attention to her son. "Come inside. We have business to discuss." Without another glance at Elena, she strode into the building, her presence commanding as ever. Alexander followed but paused just before stepping inside. "Try not to get yourself killed in traffic," he murmured, barely above a whisper. Elena folded her arms. "Try not to let your ego crush you." For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt something unexpected, a flicker of amusement. As the doors of Grayson Tower closed behind him, Elena exhaled sharply, forcing herself to shake off the encounter. She had no time for entitled billionaires with too much power and too little humility. Or so she thought. Elena didn't think about Alexander Grayson again, at least that's what she told herself. But fate had other plans, and just 48 hours after their first heated exchange, she found herself standing outside Grayson Tower once more, clutching a crumpled invitation in her hand. The envelope had arrived at her tiny apartment early that morning, a stark contrast to the chipped coffee table it had landed on. The elegant embossed lettering read, "Elena Carter, your presence is requested at an exclusive event. Grayson Tower, 8 p.m. No signature, no explanation, just an invitation wrapped in mystery. Elena told herself it was a mistake, a joke, a trap, anything but what it seemed. But curiosity was her weakness, and as a journalist, she couldn't ignore a story when it practically knocked on her door. Now, standing in front of the grand entrance, She debated turning around. But before she could make her choice, a sleek voice interrupted her thoughts. "I didn't think you'd show." Her pulse jumped at the sound of Alexander's voice. He stood near the entrance, watching her with an expression that was half amusement, half something she couldn't quite read. Elena squared her shoulders. "I didn't think I was invited." He stepped closer, the city lights casting sharp angles over his features. "You weren't." A shiver, not from the cold, raced down her spine. "Then why am I here?" Alexander's smirk was slow and deliberate. "Because you don't know how to walk away." The challenge in his tone was undeniable, and something about the way he said it sent a thrill through her veins. Against her better judgment, she followed him inside, unaware that stepping through those gilded doors would change everything. Because this wasn't just an event, it was a test, and Elena Carter had just walked straight into the lion's den. Elena stepped into the grand ballroom of Grayson Tower, her breath momentarily stolen by the sheer opulence of the event. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the elegantly dressed elite, their laughter and whispered conversations weaving a melody of power and privilege. Alexander walked beside her, his presence both commanding and enigmatic. She had spent years exposing corruption and deceit, yet something about this world unsettled her more than any story she had ever chased. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and Alexander plucked 2 flutes, handing one to her. "You're making quite the impression," he murmured, his lips barely moving. Elena's eyes flicked to the nearby guests, some watching her with veiled curiosity, others with thinly disguised disdain. "I can tell," she said, taking a sip. The bubbles fizzed against her tongue, an elegant contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Before she could question why she had been invited, a tall, raven-haired woman approached. Her emerald gown clung to her like liquid silk, her striking features twisted in a knowing smirk. "Elena Carter," she drawled, her voice dripping with amusement. "The journalist?" Elena straightened her spine. "And you are?" The woman laughed lightly, placing a delicate hand on Alexander's arm. "Isabella Grayson, Alexander's sister." Recognition clicked in Elena's mind. The infamous socialite, ruthless and cunning. The tension in the air sharpened. "Interesting choice of company tonight, brother," Isabella mused, her gaze flickering between them. "Bringing a reporter into our world?" Alexander's expression remained unreadable. "Elena's not just any reporter." Isabella's smirk widened. "No, she's not." Elena felt the weight of the room shift, eyes lingering, whispers forming in the corners. She was an intruder in their world, and they wanted her to know it, but she wasn't one to back down. Meeting Isabella's gaze head-on, she took another sip of champagne and smiled. "I guess we'll find out just how interesting this night gets." Alexander's chuckle was low, almost imperceptible. The game had begun, and Elena was already playing. Elena maintained her poised expression, but beneath the surface her mind was racing. She had spent years exposing the corruption and secrets of men like Alexander Grayson, and now she was standing in the heart of their empire. A sudden hush fell over the room as an older woman made her entrance. Draped in a deep sapphire gown, her presence commanded immediate attention. Her icy gaze locked onto Elena with the weight of a judge passing a verdict. Isabella smirked, "And here comes the queen herself." Alexander tensed beside Elena, but his face remained unreadable. "Mother." Elena felt an immediate chill. Isabella and Alexander's mother, the infamous Catherine Grayson, "So," Catherine said, her voice as smooth as it was cutting, "this is the woman who has captured my son's attention." Elena met her gaze evenly. "I didn't realize I had—" A slow smile curved Catherine's lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, my dear, you have, in ways you cannot even imagine." Alexander's grip on his champagne flute tightened. "Mother, don't—" Catherine waved a hand, silencing him. "Let's not be rude, Alexander. Ms. Carter is our guest. But tell me, dear," she turned her full focus to Elena, "what exactly do you hope to gain from mingling with a family like ours?" Elena's jaw clenched, but she refused to waver. "I didn't come here to gain anything." Catherine's smile sharpened. "Then you're either a fool or a liar." The tension in the room was suffocating. Elena felt the eyes of every guest boring into her, waiting for her reaction, expecting her to falter. Instead, she took another sip of champagne and met Catherine's stare with unwavering resolve. "Or maybe I'm just not playing by your rules." A flicker of something, amusement, respect, flashed in Catherine's expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. She glanced at Alexander. "I do hope you know what you're doing." With that, she turned and glided away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the chandeliers above them. Isabella chuckled softly. "Well, that was entertaining." Elena exhaled, refusing to let the encounter rattle her. She had faced worse, and if Catherine Grayson thought she could intimidate her, she was mistaken. Alexander watched Elena closely, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure you want to be here?" Elena met his gaze. "I don't back down." For a moment something flickered in his eyes, something dark, intrigued. "Good," he murmured, "because this is just the beginning." And as the music swelled around them, Elena realized that she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Elena barely had time to process Catherine Grayson's veiled threat before a new wave of guests approached Alexander, offering polite greetings and empty smiles. The Grayson matriarch had made her stance clear. Elena was an unwelcome anomaly in their world. Still, she refused to be shaken. "Careful, darling," Isabella murmured in passing, her voice laced with mockery. "You might just make an enemy of someone you can't handle." Elena tilted her head. "That almost sounds like a warning." Isabella smirked. "More like a promise." Before Elena could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "Isabella, don't you have somewhere else to be?" His sister's gaze lingered on Elena a beat too long before she sashayed away, disappearing into the sea of guests. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She enjoys stirring trouble." Elena exhaled sharply. "Your whole family does." He let out a low chuckle, though there was little humor in it. "Then you should be careful, because in this world, trouble has consequences." Their conversation was interrupted by a smooth, velvety voice from behind them. "Alexander." Elena turned to find a woman standing just a few feet away. She was stunning, tall, poised, and exuding an effortless grace that only old money could produce. Her emerald green gown shimmered under the lights, hugging every curve with precision. But it wasn't her beauty that caught Elena's attention. It was the way her gaze lingered on Alexander, possessive, knowing. "Victoria," Alexander acknowledged, his tone unreadable. Elena felt the air shift. This wasn't just another socialite. This was someone important. Victoria's smile was dazzling, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "It's been a while." "Not long enough." Alexander murmured. Victoria's gaze flicked to Elena. And you must be? Elena Carter. Alexander answered before she could. She's with me. Elena caught the way Victoria's nails dug into her champagne flute just slightly. Interesting. Elena smiled sweetly. I'd say the same. Victoria chuckled, her eyes dark with something unreadable. Enjoy the party, Elena. I have a feeling you'll find it enlightening. With that, she turned on her heel, disappearing into the crowd just as Isabella had moments before. Elena narrowed her eyes. Who was that? Alexander exhaled. My ex-fiancé. Her stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. Charming. He turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. You have no idea? Elena had stepped into dangerous territory, and for the first time that evening, she wondered if she truly knew what she had gotten herself into. Elena swallowed the unease settling in her chest. Alexander's ex-fiancé. The weight of that revelation was heavier than she wanted to admit. The party continued around them, music swelling, laughter echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Yet the presence of Victoria still lingered like an unshakable ghost. Do you want to leave? Alexander asked, his voice unusually gentle. Elena straightened. I'm not running away from anyone. A flicker of something, approval, admiration, passed through his gaze. Then let's give them something to talk about. Before she could react, he extended a hand, his expression unreadable. Dance with me. Elena hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand into his. His grip was firm yet warm, steadying her in a way she didn't expect. He led her onto the dance floor, seamlessly pulling her into his arms. As the orchestra transitioned into a slow, sensual waltz, they moved effortlessly, his hand pressing against the small of her back. Their proximity was intoxicating. You're making a statement, she murmured. Alexander smirked. Isn't that what you wanted? She looked up at him, her heart hammering. I wanted the truth. His smirk faded. Then listen closely. He spun her, pulling her back with a deftness that left her breathless. Everything you see tonight, the power plays, the whispered threats, the pretty smiles hiding knives, it's all part of a game, and now you're in it. Elena's fingers tightened in his grip. And you? What role do you play? Alexander's eyes darkened. The one who doesn't lose. Before she could respond, a presence loomed beside them. Victoria. Mind if I cut in? She asked smoothly, though her gaze was locked on Alexander, ignoring Elena entirely. Elena started to step back, but Alexander's grip tightened. He didn't let go. His jaw tensed, eyes flashing with something unreadable. Actually, I do mind. A sharp intake of breath from Victoria, the first crack in her perfect composure, but it was brief, gone in an instant. Interesting, she mused, stepping back with an elegant smile. This game is just getting started. With that, she melted back into the crowd, leaving Elena and Alexander in the center of the dance floor, the world watching. Elena exhaled, pulse racing. You really don't lose, do you? Alexander's lips brushed near her ear as he whispered, Not when something is worth winning. And in that moment, Elena knew this was far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The night air was thick with tension as Elena stepped onto the grand balcony, needing a moment to breathe. The opulence of the party, the whispered threats, the presence of Victoria, it was all a lot to take in. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't foolish either. She had walked into a world where every move mattered and hesitation could be fatal. A low voice interrupted her thoughts. You shouldn't be out here alone. She turned to find Alexander standing in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the ballroom behind him. He looked at her with a mixture of concern and something deeper, something unreadable. "I needed air," Elena admitted, gripping the cold railing. "Your world is exhausting." Alexander stepped closer. "It's not mine alone anymore." Elena let out a humorless chuckle. "That almost sounds like a warning." "It is." His voice was softer now, the sharp edge gone. "Victoria isn't the only one watching you tonight. There are people here who would do anything to see you gone." Elena turned fully to face him. "Including your mother?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Especially my mother?" A shiver ran down her spine, but she squared her shoulders. "Then tell me the truth. Why me? Why bring me into this if you knew it would be dangerous?" Alexander hesitated, as if weighing something in his mind. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper, placing it in her hand. "Because you were already in it before you even knew." Elena frowned, unfolding the note. Her breath hitched. It was a photo, grainy but clear enough. A picture of her outside her apartment, taken weeks ago. Her pulse pounded. "What the hell is this?" "Someone's been watching you." His voice was grave. "Long before I found you." Elena's grip tightened around the paper. She had been careful, always. But this meant she was a target before she ever stepped into Alexander's world. A cold realization settled over her. "Then I guess it's time to find out who they are." Alexander's gaze locked onto hers, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Then we do it together." And as the wind howled around them, Elena knew there was no turning back now. Elena couldn't sleep that night. The image of the photograph burned into her mind, a stark reminder that her life had changed in ways she'd never anticipated. Someone had been watching her. But why? And for how long? The next morning, she sat in the sunlit dining room of Alexander's penthouse, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. Across the table, Alexander scrolled through his phone, his jaw tight. She could see it, the storm brewing beneath his carefully controlled exterior. Finally, he put his phone down and looked at her. "I had my people trace the origin of the photograph." Elena straightened. "And?" "It was mailed from an untraceable location, but there was one clue." He slid a second photo across the table. "Recognize him?" Elena's breath caught. The man in the picture was barely visible, captured from a distance, but there was something about his posture, the way he lingered near her apartment, that sent a chill down her spine. I think I've seen him before," she admitted, gripping the photo, "near the cafe where I work." Alexander's expression darkened. "Then he's been closer than we thought." Before Elena could respond, the sound of shattering glass rang through the penthouse. A gunshot, then another. Alexander moved fast, shoving Elena to the ground as another window exploded. His body shielded hers as he barked into his phone, "Lock down the building, now!" Elena's heart pounded as she stared at the destruction around them. Someone wasn't just watching her anymore. They were coming for her. Alexander's grip on her tightened. "We're leaving! Now!" He pulled her to her feet and led her through a private exit, his security team already moving into place. The city outside was as dazzling as ever, but to Elena, it suddenly felt like a battlefield. As Alexander's driver sped them away from the penthouse, she turned to him, fear and determination warring in her eyes. "Whoever did this, they're not going to stop, are they?" Alexander's jaw clenched. Number, but neither am I. Elena exhaled, steeling herself. If this was a war, she refused to be a casualty. And in that moment, she made a decision. She was going to fight back. The black SUV cut through the city streets like a silent predator, weaving through traffic as Alexander's security team ensured their escape. Elena's hands clenched into fists as she stared out the tinted window, her mind racing with a million questions. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, turning to Alexander. "A safe house," he answered, his voice low and steady. "Until we know who's behind this, we can't risk staying in one place." Elena exhaled sharply. "You think it's Victoria? Or your mother?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "They have their ways, but this is different." He tapped his fingers against his knee, thinking, whoever they are, they don't just want to scare us. They want you gone. Elena shuddered, but fear quickly gave way to anger. "Then we stop them first." Alexander's lips curled into a half-smile. "That's what I like about you." The SUV pulled up to a discreet modern townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. The security team moved in first, sweeping the area before Alexander led Elena inside. "This place is wired with the best security," he assured her. "You'll be safe here." Elena turned to him, her eyes blazing. "I don't want to hide. I want to fight." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to a locked cabinet, entered a code, and pulled out a sleek silver handgun. "You ever held one of these before?" Elena's breath hitched, but she reached for it without hesitation. "Number, but I can learn." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Alexander's face. "Then let's begin." Over the next few hours, he taught her the basics, how to hold it, aim, and fire. Her hands were unsteady at first, but by the time the sun had set, she was hitting her targets with cold precision. As she set the gun down, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She exchanged a glance with Alexander before answering. "Hello?" A distorted voice crackled through the line. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." The call ended. Elena's blood turned to ice, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she lifted her gaze to Alexander, her expression hard. "Looks like they just made their biggest mistake." Alexander smirked. "Then let's make sure it's their last." Elena sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. The words of the anonymous caller echoed in her mind. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Not a threat, a promise. But walking away wasn't an option, not anymore. Alexander stood by the window, his posture rigid as he stared out into the night. The safe house was quiet, almost too quiet. His security team had locked down the area, but paranoia gnawed at him. Whoever was behind this had gotten too close. "They know where I am," Elena finally said, her voice steady. "Which means we don't have time to sit and wait." Alexander turned to her. "We won't, but we also can't make reckless moves. They want you afraid. They want you to run." Elena clenched her fists. "Then let's show them I don't scare easy." A smirk flickered across Alexander's lips. "I was hoping you'd say that." He grabbed his phone and made a call. "Dmitri, pull the records, bank transactions, surveillance footage, anything unusual in the past month, and find out if anyone in my family has been making silent moves." Elena arched a brow. "You think it's someone close to you?" Alexander's expression darkened. "In my world, betrayal is currency." An hour later, Dmitri sent over the files. Elena and Alexander sifted through the records, looking for anomalies. One name popped up repeatedly. Marcus Delacroix, an old business rival of the family. "Elena," Alexander murmured, flipping through the files. "He's been making cash transactions near your apartment for weeks, before I even met you." Elena's breath caught. Why would a billionaire care about me? Alexander's grip on the papers tightened. That's what we're going to find out. Before he could say another word, an alarm blared through the safe house. An intruder. Alexander reached for his gun, motioning for Elena to stay low. The security team moved swiftly, but the sound of breaking glass sent a sharp jolt of adrenaline through her. Elena grabbed the pistol he had given her, her hand steady. She wasn't the same girl who walked into this world unprepared. A shadow moved outside the door. Heavy footsteps, then a single knock. A voice followed, calm and cold. "Come out, Alexander. Let's talk." Alexander's expression didn't waver, but Elena could see the tension in his eyes. Whoever was on the other side of that door, they weren't just here to talk. And she was ready for whatever came next. The room was silent, except for the distant hum of the city outside. The knock at the door still echoed in Elena's mind, a taunting sound that sent ice through her veins. Alexander raised his gun, his grip steady. His security team was already moving, taking their positions. Every muscle in Elena's body was coiled, waiting for whatever came next. "Who is it?" Alexander's voice was sharp, controlled. A chuckle followed. "Come now, Alexander. Is that any way to greet an old friend?" Alexander's eyes darkened. "Marcus!" Elena's pulse quickened. Marcus Delacroix, the man whose name was all over the records, the one who had been lurking near her apartment long before she met Alexander. "Open the door, or I'll let myself in," Marcus called, his voice dripping with amusement. Alexander gave a slight nod to his head of security. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a tall, sharply dressed man with dark eyes that held a dangerous glint. "Ah," Marcus stepped inside as if he owned the place. "Finally, we meet face to face." His gaze flickered to Elena. "And you must be the reason Alexander here has been so distracted." Elena refused to flinch under his stare. "And you must be the one who thinks he can intimidate me." Marcus chuckled. "I like her, Alexander. Feisty." He turned his attention back to Alexander. "You and I have unfinished business." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You put a target on Elena. That makes this personal?" Marcus sighed, feigning disappointment. "You always were too sentimental. I told you, Alexander, the past has a way of catching up." Elena narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" Marcus smirked. "Oh, he hasn't told you?" He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Your knight in shining armor isn't as noble as you think. The reason you're in danger? It's because of him." Elena felt the world tilt. She turned to Alexander. "What is he talking about?" Alexander didn't answer right away. His grip on the gun tightened. His eyes locked on Marcus. "Leave, now." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender. "You'll have to tell her eventually, Alexander. You can't protect her from the truth forever." With a smirk, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Elena exhaled, her heart hammering. "Alexander!" He turned away, his posture rigid. Not now. But Elena knew one thing for certain. Whatever Alexander was hiding, it was bigger than she had ever imagined. Elena stood frozen, Marcus's words ringing in her ears. "The reason you're in danger? It's because of him." She turned to Alexander, but his face was unreadable, a mask of cold control. He wasn't just keeping secrets. He was hiding something massive, and now she needed to know what. She took a step toward him. "Alexander, tell me the truth." His eyes met hers, dark and conflicted, but he shook his head. "Not yet." Elena's stomach twisted. "Not yet?" she repeated, disbelief creeping into her tone. "Someone just tried to kill me, and you're telling me not yet?" Alexander raked a hand through his hair, his composure fracturing. "I'm protecting you, Elena." "By keeping me in the dark?" she shot back. "That's not protection. That's control." A muscle in his jaw twitched, but before he could respond, Dmitri burst into the room, his expression grim. "We have a problem." Alexander stiffened. "What now?" Dmitri handed him a tablet. Surveillance footage. This was taken just outside. Elena leaned in as Alexander pressed play. The grainy video showed a black-clad figure standing in the shadows across the street, watching their building. The figure turned slightly, and for a brief second their face was visible. Elena's breath caught. It wasn't Marcus, it was someone else. A woman. Alexander's face darkened. "Damn it!" Elena's pulse pounded. "Who is she?" Alexander exhaled sharply. "Her name is Victoria." Elena frowned. "And?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was all Elena needed to understand. "She's your ex, isn't she?" Alexander closed his eyes for a brief second, then nodded. "Yes." Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. "And she's part of this?" "She's more than part of this," Dmitri interjected. "She's financing it." The room spun. "You mean to tell me your ex-fiancé is the one trying to kill me?" Alexander clenched his fists. "It's complicated." Elena let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I bet it is." Before Alexander could say anything else, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. The security team's voices erupted in chaos. They weren't safe anymore. The enemy wasn't knocking. They were breaking down the door. The crash from downstairs sent a jolt of adrenaline through Elena's veins. The unmistakable sound of splintering wood followed. Whoever was coming for them wasn't being subtle. Alexander moved first, grabbing Elena's wrist and pulling her behind him as he retrieved his weapon from the holster at his waist. His security team was already in motion, shouting commands through their earpieces as they moved to intercept the intruders. "Elena, stay behind me," Alexander ordered, his voice firm but low. She clenched her jaw. "I can handle myself." A loud blast echoed from below, silencing any further argument. Dmitri swore under his breath as he checked the monitors. "They're inside, 5 of them heavily armed. This isn't just a warning." Alexander's expression hardened. "They want blood." Elena's heart pounded as she reached for the weapon Alexander had given her earlier. The weight of it in her hand was foreign but reassuring. She had come too far to be a damsel waiting to be saved. A second blast rang out, followed by shouting, muffled at first, then clearer as heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. "They're coming up," Dmitri barked, drawing his own weapon. Alexander positioned himself near the door, his stance unwavering. "Elena, stay close. We're going out the back." She nodded, gripping her weapon tighter. "I'm ready." The door burst open. A masked man stepped in, something sharp glinting in his hand. But before he could react, Alexander moved first, striking with precise force. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. Another attacker lunged into the room, but Dmitri took him down before he even had a chance to strike. The air smelled of sweat and fear. "Go, now!" Alexander shouted, grabbing Elena's hand and pulling her toward the hidden exit at the far end of the room. More chaos erupted behind them, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Elena's legs burned as they sprinted down the narrow corridor. Her mind raced. Victoria did this. She's not just watching. She's hunting me. They reached the emergency exit, and Dmitri shoved the door open, revealing a black SUV idling just beyond the alleyway. "In the car!" Alexander ordered, practically lifting Elena into the back seat before jumping in after her. The driver hit the gas before the door even shut. Elena turned to Alexander, her breath coming fast. "This isn't over." Alexander's jaw was set, his hands balled into fists. "Number, it's just begun." The SUV tore through the empty streets, its tires screeching against the pavement as the driver maneuvered through sharp turns. Elena pressed her hands against the seat, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart still pounded from the attack, her mind racing with unanswered questions. "Where are we going?" she asked, forcing herself to stay calm. Alexander glanced at Dmitri. "Safe house." Dmitri shook his head. "Number, they knew where we were before. We can't assume any of our locations are secure. We need to disappear." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That means going off-grid." Elena's chest tightened. "And how exactly do we do that?" Dmitri tapped on his phone, then looked up. "We have another option. There's a private estate an hour outside the city, completely untraceable. No electronics, no signals. If Victoria's tracking us, she won't find us there." Elena exhaled. "Fine, let's go." The SUV sped through the city, its tinted windows shielding them from prying eyes. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. That, somehow, Victoria was always one step ahead. They reached the outskirts of the city, the neon lights fading into long stretches of empty road. Trees lined both sides, shrouding them in darkness. The estate came into view, a massive, secluded mansion hidden behind towering iron gates. Dmitri typed in a code, and the gates swung open. The SUV rolled up the driveway and came to a stop. Alexander stepped out first, scanning their surroundings before helping Elena out. "We'll be safe here." Elena wasn't convinced. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet. Dust covered the furniture, the air thick with the scent of aged wood. Clearly, no one had been here in a long time. Dmitri locked the doors behind them. "I'll set up a perimeter." Alexander nodded and turned to Elena. "Get some rest. You've been through enough." She shook her head. "You really think I can sleep after all of this?" He sighed, stepping closer. "I know you're scared." "I'm angry," she corrected. "Someone tried to kill me tonight. Your ex is behind it, and I still don't know why." Alexander looked away, tension rolling off him in waves. "It's more complicated than you think." Elena crossed her arms. "Then make me understand." Before he could answer, Dmitri's voice crackled through the intercom. "Alexander, we have a problem." Alexander grabbed the radio. "What is it?" Dmitri's tone was grim. "The security feed just picked up movement at the gate." Elena's stomach dropped. "They found us?" Dmitri exhaled. "Not exactly. It's just one person." Alexander stiffened. "Who?" Dmitri hesitated, then said, "Your mother." Alexander's expression darkened at Dmitri's words. His mother showing up at a time like this could mean only one thing: trouble. Elena felt a chill creep down her spine. Alexander exhaled sharply, his hands clenched into fists. "Let her in." Dmitri hesitated. "Are you sure? This could be a trap." Alexander's jaw tightened. "If she wanted me dead, she wouldn't come alone." Dmitri gave a short nod and pressed a button on the control panel. A low buzz filled the air as the gates groaned open. Moments later, a sleek black car glided up the driveway, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the person inside. Elena instinctively stepped closer to Alexander, her pulse quickening. "What does she want?" He shook his head. With her, it's never just one thing. The car door opened, and Catherine Grayson stepped out, the very image of elegance and power. She was draped in a tailored midnight blue coat, her signature pearl necklace resting at her throat. Not a strand of her silver-streaked hair was out of place. Her sharp eyes flicked over the mansion, then landed on Alexander with a knowing smirk. "Hiding out in your father's forgotten estate?" She let out a soft chuckle. "How poetic!" Alexander's expression remained unreadable. "What do you want, Mother?" Catherine took a few unhurried steps toward them, her heels clicking against the stone path. Then her gaze shifted to Elena, a slow, deliberate assessment. "So, you're the one who's turned my son into a fugitive?" Elena squared her shoulders, refusing to cower. "Someone tried to kill me tonight. That's why we're here." Catherine arched an eyebrow. "And you think I had something to do with it?" Alexander's voice was ice. "Wouldn't be the first time you played both sides." A flicker of something crossed Catherine's face. Annoyance? Amusement? It was impossible to tell. She turned her gaze back to Elena. "I must admit, you're not what I expected." Elena folded her arms. "And you're exactly what I expected." A slow smile curled Victoria's lips. "Fiery. I see why you like her, Alexander." She glanced back at him. "But let's not waste time with pleasantries. I came here to warn you." Alexander's shoulders tensed. "Warn me about what?" Catherine's expression sobered. "You're underestimating Isabella." Elena felt her breath hitch at the name. "You know what she's planning?" Catherine gave a slight nod. "More than you do. And if you think this was her final move, you're already losing." Alexander took a step closer, his tone deadly calm. "Then tell me what she's planning." Catherine sighed. "I could, but information like this doesn't come for free." Elena's stomach twisted. Of course, Catherine Grayson never did anything unless it benefited her. Alexander's eyes darkened. "What do you want?" Catherine's smirk returned. "Oh, darling, you already know." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Finally, Alexander exhaled, his voice cold. "You want me to come back to the family?" Catherine tilted her head. "And why shouldn't you? You have an empire waiting for you, resources, power, the kind of protection that could make all of this disappear." Her gaze flickered toward Elena. "And yet, here you are, running." Elena clenched her fists. "He's not running. He's choosing his own path." Catherine's lips pursed slightly. "How romantic." Alexander took a step forward, eyes locked on his mother's. "If you have real information, give it to me. Otherwise, leave." Catherine studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. "Fine. But when you realize you need me, don't take too long to come crawling back." She turned on her heel and strode back to her car, the tension lingering even as the engine purred to life. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you believe her?" Alexander's jaw was tight. "That's the thing about my mother." He turned to look at her, his eyes dark. "She never warns without reason." The sound of Victoria's car disappearing down the driveway left a hollow echo in the night. Elena could still feel the icy weight of her words pressing down on her chest. Victoria had come to warn them, but at what cost? Alexander remained frozen, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the spot where his mother's car had vanished. "She knows something," Elena said quietly. Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "She always knows something, but she won't give it away for free." Dimitri's voice crackled through the intercom. "The perimeter's still clear, but I don't like this. If Catherine could find us, so could Victoria. Elena turned to Alexander. Then we can't stay here. Alexander nodded slowly. We need a new plan. Before they could strategize, Dimitri's voice returned, his tone clipped with urgency. We have movement. Elena's heart skipped a beat. What kind of movement? Dimitri's hesitation made her stomach tighten. Surveillance drones, small, but they're watching. Alexander cursed under his breath. Victoria. Elena gripped his arm. What do we do? His mind raced. They had minutes, maybe less, before Victoria people closed in. We leave now! Dimitri was already in motion, disabling as many cameras as he could from the control panel. I'll stall them, but you two need to move fast. Elena's pulse thundered as Alexander grabbed her hand and pulled her through the back of the mansion. A hidden passage, disguised as an antique bookcase, creaked open. Follow me, Alexander instructed. They slipped into a dimly lit tunnel, the air thick with dust and secrets. The walls bore the weight of time, old bricks cracked with age. How do you even know about this place? Elena asked, her voice hushed. Alexander's expression was grim. Because my father built it for situations like this. She wanted to ask more, but now wasn't the time. They hurried through the underground passage, emerging into a secluded clearing behind the property. A car was waiting, one of Alexander's emergency escape vehicles. As they climbed in, Elena cast one last glance toward the mansion. The place had been their sanctuary for only a moment, but now it was compromised. Where to? She asked. Alexander's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Somewhere Isabella can't find us. Dimitri's voice came through Alexander's earpiece. I'll buy you time, but be careful. She's not just watching. Elena swallowed hard. Then what is she doing? There was a beat of silence before Dimitri responded. She's hunting. The night stretched endlessly as Alexander drove with calculated urgency. The city lights blurred past them, but neither he nor Elena dared to relax. Victoria's reach was long, and Catherine's warning still echoed in their minds. Elena's fingers tightened around her seatbelt. Where are we going? Alexander's grip on the wheel was like iron. Somewhere she won't expect. Dimitri's voice crackled over the earpiece. I managed to jam the drones temporarily, but they'll switch to ground pursuit soon. You have a window, but it's closing. Alexander cursed under his breath and made a sharp turn onto an unmarked road. The path ahead led them away from the city's chaos and into the quiet hills that overlooked it. We can't keep running, Elena said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. We have to end this. Alexander exhaled sharply. I know. Dimitri's voice came through again, lower this time. We have intel. Victoria's next move isn't just about you two anymore. She's going after your assets, your company, your legacy. Alexander's jaw clenched. She's trying to burn everything down. She's already started, Dimitri confirmed. If you don't stop her now, there won't be anything left to come back to. Elena turned to Alexander, her gaze unwavering. Then we fight back. For a moment, he simply looked at her, the fire in her eyes igniting something deep inside him. Dimitri, Alexander said, get me a meeting with the board. If she wants to destroy me, she'll have to do it in the light. Already working on it, Dimitri replied. But you need to be ready for anything. Alexander nodded, determination settling over him like armor. So does she. The next morning, the world woke to headlines of an emergency board meeting at Lancaster Industries. Victoria arrived, dressed in the confidence of someone who believed they had already won. But when she stepped into the boardroom, she found Alexander waiting, calm, unshaken. Elena sat beside him, her presence a silent declaration. She wasn't going anywhere. The smile faltered for only a second. "I must say, I wasn't expecting you to show your face." Alexander leaned forward. "Then you don't know me at all." The battle was about to begin, and this time there would be no more running. The boardroom was a battlefield, but instead of weapons, the fight would be waged with power, influence, and deception. Alexander sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his fingers laced together, as he regarded with the cool detachment of a king watching a pretender to his throne. Elena sat beside him, an unshakable force in her own right. Around them, the members of the Lancaster Industries Board shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Victoria took her seat, crossing one leg over the other. "You've been reckless, Alexander," she began, her voice as smooth as silk. "Your absence has left this company vulnerable. Investors are worried. The board is uneasy. And yet here you are acting as if you still have control." Alexander gave her a slow smile. "That's because I do." Murmurs rippled across the room. Victoria's lips twitched, but she quickly masked her irritation. "You're clinging to a dynasty that no longer belongs to you," she said. "I have the votes, Alexander. You've lost." Dimitri's voice came through the hidden earpiece Alexander wore. "Wait for it. 3, 2. The double doors swung open. A man in a crisp navy suit strode in, Jonathan Reeves, the company's largest private shareholder. Victoria's confidence wavered. "Jonathan?" He ignored her, walking straight to Alexander. "I don't take kindly to manipulation," he said. "And after reviewing everything that's happened, including the fraudulent financial reports you tried to pass off, I've made my decision." He turned to the board. "Effective immediately, Victoria is removed from her position, and her shares are frozen pending investigation." The room erupted in gasps. Victoria shot to her feet. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can." Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks, and I just did. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Like I said, Victoria, you don't know me at all." Her eyes burned with fury, but she had lost. Security entered to escort her out, and as she passed Elena, she hissed, "You think this is over?" Elena met her gaze, unwavering. "Number, but you are." Victoria was dragged out, her reign of terror collapsing around her. Alexander reached for Elena's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "It's over," he whispered. She exhaled, the weight of their battles lifting. "Finally." But even as victory settled in, they both knew this was only the beginning of the life they had fought so hard to build, and they would protect it together. The news of Victoria's downfall spread like wildfire. Headlines across financial media declared it the end of an era, a calculated empire undone by greed and betrayal. But for Alexander and Elena, it was the beginning of something far more meaningful: freedom. The morning after the board meeting, Alexander stood on the balcony of their penthouse, gazing out over the city skyline. He felt the weight that had pressed on him for years finally begin to lift. Elena stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We did it," she murmured. He turned to her, his expression softening. "No, you did it. You never backed down, even when the odds were impossible." Elena shook her head, smiling. "We did this together."